Pam Bondi exposes a shocking secret deal involving Supreme Court Justice Coney Barrett. The entire room goes silent. Stay to the end to discover the hidden evidence Bondi reveals. Like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on this jaw-dropping story. The grand hearing room of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee was packed to the brim. Reporters jostled for position behind the velvet ropes. Photographers' lenses clicked intermittently like the ticking of an ominous clock, and senators whispered amongst themselves as aides scurried about. The air was charged, not with the usual dull procedural tension, but with something different today. Something electric. Word had leaked 2 days prior that former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi would be appearing as a surprise witness. The committee had been in the middle of what was supposed to be a routine review hearing concerning new judicial ethics guidelines. A mundane affair usually reserved for C-SPAN viewers and little else. But when Bondi's name was suddenly added to the witness list, everything changed. Pam Bondi wasn't known for entering fights she wasn't prepared to win. Her years as Florida's top prosecutor had forged her reputation as one of the most formidable legal minds in the country. And unlike many of her peers, she wasn't afraid of taking on the powerful, no matter how high their robes or how pristine their reputations. And at the center of today's storm was none other than Supreme Court Justice Coney Barrett. For the past 6 months, whispers had circulated around Washington's corridors of power. Whispers of an undisclosed relationship between Justice Barrett and a shadowy corporate interest group. A group that had allegedly benefited from several recent Supreme Court rulings in ways that defied coincidence. Nothing concrete had surfaced. The rumors were too murky, the sources too afraid to go on record. Until today, as the gavel banged and the hearing was called to order, the room hushed. Senator James Whitaker, the chairman, cleared his throat and spoke. Today, we welcome former Attorney General Pam Bondi, who has requested to address this committee regarding matters she deems of utmost constitutional importance. Bondi rose from her seat with calm precision. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, her blonde hair neatly pinned back, she radiated a quiet but unmistakable authority. She walked to the witness table, adjusted the microphone, and let her eyes sweep across the room, landing briefly but deliberately on Justice Barrett, seated 2 rows behind the senators. Coney Barrett returned the look impassively, her judicial mask firmly in place. But behind the stoic expression, her heart began to beat a little faster. She hadn't expected Bondi to be here. And worse, she hadn't expected that Bondi might actually know something. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," Bondi began, her voice steady clear. "I appear today because I believe that the integrity of this nation's highest court is at risk. And because I believe that we, as guardians of the Constitution, cannot remain silent in the face of corruption, no matter how veiled it may be." The room stilled further. Even the rustling of reporters' notepads ceased. Bondi continued. "For several months, I have been investigating the activities of the Federal Liberty Institute, an organization that, on the surface, presents itself as a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to promoting constitutional scholarship. In truth, it is an intricate network of dark money, legal influence, and backdoor lobbying." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My team has uncovered a series of undisclosed financial transactions between this institute and several entities with cases pending, or recently decided, before the Supreme Court." Now several senators sat forward, pens poised. Aides whispered urgently to their bosses. Bondi opened a leather folder before her and withdrew a sheaf of documents. Among these transactions, one particular arrangement stands out. In late 2023, the Institute made a series of payments totaling $2.5 million to a Delaware-based consulting firm called Eastern Strategies Group. This firm, in turn, funneled funds into a trust controlled by a close family associate of Justice Coney Barrett, a trust that was not disclosed on her financial disclosure forms. The gasp that followed rippled through the chamber. Justice Barrett's composure flickered for a fraction of a second. A tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. Then the mask returned. Bondi pressed on. "I have here certified records of these transactions, obtained legally through whistleblower cooperation and verified by independent forensic accountants." She held up the documents for the cameras. The timing of these payments correlates directly with a controversial Supreme Court decision in Harrington v. SEC, which gutted certain federal oversight powers and delivered an enormous windfall to several corporate members of the Federal Liberty Institute. The room erupted into murmurs. Senators exchanged looks. Journalists scrambled to update their live feeds. Senator Whitaker banged the gavel. "Order! Order in this chamber!" Bondi calmly lowered the documents. "There is more," she said. Every head turned back to her. In the days leading up to the Harrington decision, Justice Barrett attended an off-the-record retreat hosted by the Federal Liberty Institute at a private estate in Virginia. I have photographs, attendee lists, and testimony from a former Institute employee confirming her presence there. None of this was disclosed to the court or to the public. The oxygen seemed to leave the room. Even the most jaded of DC veterans recognized the gravity of what had just been said. A Supreme Court justice secretly attending a gathering funded by interests with cases before the court. It was the kind of scandal that could rock the very foundations of American jurisprudence. Senator Whitaker, his voice grave, leaned forward. "Ms. Bondi, are you prepared to submit all of this evidence to this committee under oath?" Bondi met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am. And do you believe this constitutes grounds for an official inquiry into Justice Barrett's conduct?" Bondi's answer was cold and immediate. "I do." Silence. A long, deep silence that settled over the entire room. Then, the unexpected. Justice Barrett herself stood. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice calm but clipped, "I request to address the committee." The room froze. This was unprecedented. Supreme Court justices did not speak at these hearings. They did not engage. But here was Amy Coney Barrett, rising to her feet, eyes locked on Pam Bondi. Senator Whitaker, stunned, managed to reply, "Justice Barrett, you may speak." The room leaned in. Everyone, senators, press, staffers, was riveted. Cameras turned, microphones pointed. History was being made, and as Justice Barrett prepared to speak, Pam Bondi calmly reached down and placed one final envelope on the table in front of her. An envelope whose contents, she knew, would change everything. And as the cameras zoomed in on that envelope, the screen faded to black, leaving the audience breathless, desperate to know what was inside. The envelope sat on the polished mahogany witness table, its cream-colored paper standing out starkly under the harsh lights of the hearing room. Pam Bondi's fingers rested lightly upon it. Not gripping, not trembling, just there, as if to remind everyone that the true climax of this hearing had not yet arrived. And in that moment, the room was utterly silent. Reporters held their breath. Aides had stopped whispering. Even the senators, veteran politicians with nerves honed through decades of scandal, intrigue, and political bloodsport, were frozen, eyes darting between Bondi, the envelope, and Justice Barrett. Justice Barrett, to her credit, did not visibly flinch. She adjusted her robe subtly, composed her posture, and stepped forward to the microphone positioned on the dais. "Mr. Chairman, members of this committee," she began, her voice clear but carrying a subtle undertone. Was it indignation? Caution? Fear? No one could quite tell. "I categorically deny any improper relationship with the Federal Liberty Institute or any of its affiliates." Pam Bondi remained impassive, her hands still resting on the envelope. Justice Barrett continued. "The retreat mentioned was a judicial conference, not a partisan gathering. I attended it in good faith, believing it to be an educational forum consistent with judicial standards." Senator Whitaker interjected. Justice Barrett, were you aware that several of the attendees at this so-called educational forum had cases pending before the court? A pause, a slight tightening of Barrett's lips. I was not aware of any pending cases involving those specific individuals at the time, she answered carefully. But Bondi's voice cut through the room, calm but resonant. Justice Barrett, with respect, the evidence I am about to submit suggests otherwise. Barrett's eyes flickered toward the envelope. Senator Whitaker looked from one woman to the other. Ms. Bondi, he said, voice steady. You may proceed. Pam Bondi opened the envelope with deliberate precision. From within, she drew 3 documents, crisp, clear, and damning. The first, she said, holding it up for the cameras, is a verified attendee list from the retreat. It includes Mr. Jonathan Meeks, CEO of Harrington Holdings, the lead petitioner in the very case we have been discussing. Gasps rippled through the chamber again. Justice Barrett's expression remained frozen, but her knuckles whitened slightly against the wood of the dais. The second, Bondi continued, laying the document flat for the senators, is an internal memo from the Federal Liberty Institute, dated 2 weeks prior to the retreat. It explicitly references Justice Barrett's attendance as an opportunity to discuss key legal strategies for the upcoming Harrington v. SEC case. The effect was immediate. Senators were no longer hiding their reactions. Eyes widened, jaws tightened. Staffers frantically texted on their phones. This was no longer an academic debate about judicial ethics. This was direct, documented evidence of inappropriate contact. Justice Barrett's voice was quieter when she spoke again. I have never read or received such a memo, she said. Pam Bondi's eyes met hers. I believe you when you say that, Justice Barrett, she replied. But your name is mentioned in the memo by those who clearly intended to leverage your presence. And then, the final blow. The third document, Bondi said, is a wire transfer authorization dated 5 days after the retreat. It authorizes a payment of $1.2 million from an account controlled by the Federal Liberty Institute's PAC to the same Delaware consulting firm, Eastern Strategies Group, whose financial ties to Justice Barrett's family trust one outlined earlier. This time the silence wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. The weight of what was being revealed was unmistakable. A pattern of influence, a trail of money, and a sitting Supreme Court justice at the center of it all. Senator Whitaker, now visibly rattled, addressed the room. In light of this new evidence, this committee will immediately move to convene a formal investigative panel. Justice Barrett, you may choose to respond further now, or submit a written statement. But before Barrett could answer, another voice spoke up, sharp, commanding. Senator Eleanor Briggs, ranking minority member of the committee and a former federal prosecutor, leaned forward. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have reviewed these documents during the recess this morning. I can confirm their authenticity. Furthermore, I believe we are now dealing with potential violations not just of judicial ethics, but of federal law. The room gasped yet again. The stakes had just escalated. Dramatically, Pam Bondi closed the folder carefully and spoke once more. Let me be clear. My intent is not to attack this court or this justice personally. My intent is to uphold the integrity of our judicial system. When even the appearance of corruption exists at the highest levels, the American people lose faith in the very foundation of our democracy. And for a moment, a rare crystalline moment, no one in the room could disagree. Even the partisan lines that so often define this chamber seemed to blur. Senators sat in grim contemplation, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Justice Barrett, for her part, remained standing. But something had changed. The ironclad certainty that had marked her earlier statements was gone. In its place was an unspoken acknowledgement. The evidence now demanded answers she could no longer brush aside. Senator Whitaker, his voice solemn, addressed both women. This committee will recess for 30 minutes. Upon return, we will begin deliberations on the formation of an investigative panel. Justice Barrett, you are invited to remain and offer any further clarifying testimony you wish. Ms. Bondi, the committee thanks you for your service today. As the gavel struck once more and senators began filing out, the room buzzed in hushed, urgent conversation. Reporters scrambled to prepare breaking headlines. Aides whispered about what this could mean for the court, for the upcoming term, for the nation itself. And at the center of it all, Pam Bondi calmly gathered her documents and rose from her seat. Justice Barrett watched her, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. For the first time in a long time, the justice felt the ground shift beneath her feet. And as Bondi walked toward the exit, she knew this was only the beginning. The real battle had just begun. And as the camera zoomed in on the solemn faces of the committee members, 30 minutes had never felt so short or so long. When the Judiciary Committee reconvened, the hearing room had transformed. Gone was the thin veneer of routine process. In its place, a palpable sense of history in the making. Senators sat more rigidly in their seats. Reporters whispered frantically into phones, sending updates to newsrooms already flashing breaking banners across cable networks. The cameras were rolling non-stop now. Every word spoken in this room would be dissected by millions before the hour was out. Justice Amy Coney Barrett had chosen to remain, seated now with her legal counsel at her side. Her robe no longer seemed like a shield. It seemed like a burden. Her face remained composed, but her eyes darted more frequently now, watching Pam Bondi, watching the senators, watching the cameras. And Pam Bondi? She sat perfectly still, her folder of evidence closed neatly before her. The lioness who had delivered the first strike was now waiting, poised, patient. She knew this was a marathon, not a sprint. Senator Whitaker called the hearing back to order. "Before we proceed," he began, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment, "Justice Barrett has requested to make a voluntary statement for the record." All eyes turned to Barrett. She rose slowly, her voice steady but noticeably lower in tone. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," she began, "I have served on this court with the highest regard for its integrity and independence. I take these allegations seriously. I maintain that I did not knowingly participate in any improper arrangement, nor did I allow any external influence to guide my decisions." A pause. Her fingers gripped the edges of the podium. "I recognize, however," she continued, "that the evidence presented raises questions that deserve answers. I welcome a full review of these matters and will cooperate fully with any inquiry this committee deems necessary." It was a carefully crafted statement, neither admission nor defiance, a legal mind playing for time. But Senator Eleanor Briggs was having none of it. "Justice Barrett," Briggs said, leaning forward, "are you willing, under oath, to answer questions regarding your communications with the Federal Liberty Institute, including any private correspondence, emails, or phone calls?" A long pause. Barrett's counsel whispered urgently in her ear. Finally, Barrett answered, "On advice of counsel, I will reserve detailed responses for the investigative process." In other words, no. The room shifted again. Tension rose. Senators whispered to aides, strategizing next moves. And then Pam Bondi's voice, calm and unwavering, sliced through the air once more. "Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to submit an additional exhibit for the committee's consideration." Senator Whitaker nodded. Pam Bondi opened her folder once more and withdrew a small, unassuming USB drive. She held it up for the record. "This drive contains a series of encrypted emails," she said. "These were provided by a whistleblower within the Federal Liberty Institute. They include direct communications between Institute leadership and intermediaries connected to Eastern Strategies Group." She placed the drive on the table before the senators. "In these emails," she continued, "there are multiple references to a so-called judicial partnership initiative. an internal code name for efforts to cultivate favorable outcomes in high court decisions. One thread explicitly discusses leveraging personal relationships with certain justices, naming Justice Barrett among them. The bombshell had dropped. Again! Gasp. Audible gasps this time. Even seasoned senators who had heard it all sat stunned. Senator Whitaker looked visibly shaken. Senator Briggs was already motioning to her staff to secure the drive for forensic examination. Justice Barrett's face had paled, her lips pressed so thin they seemed to vanish. Senator Whitaker cleared his throat. "Ms. Bondi, are you asserting that there is written documentation indicating a coordinated attempt to influence Supreme Court decisions, specifically naming Justice Barrett?" Bondi met his gaze evenly. "I am, Mr. Chairman. The emails are dated, authenticated, and corroborated by independent metadata analysis." The room felt as though it was holding its collective breath. Senator Briggs, her voice cold and deliberate, addressed Justice Barrett directly. "Justice Barrett, in light of this new evidence, do you maintain your prior statements of impartiality?" Barrett's legal counsel stood abruptly. "Mr. Chairman, given the late introduction of this material, Justice Barrett will invoke her right to review all evidence with counsel before making further statements." A ripple of incredulous murmurs spread through the chamber. This was no longer a defensive posture. It was retreat. Senator Whitaker banged the gavel again. "This committee will, as of this moment, formally convene an investigative panel under Rule 5 of Judiciary Oversight. All materials submitted will be sequestered for forensic review. Subpoenas will be issued as necessary." He looked directly at Barrett. "Justice Barrett, you will be required to submit all relevant communications and financial records for review." Barrett's counsel nodded tersely. The justice herself remained silent, her eyes now fixed firmly on the table before her. And then, the final, quiet moment that sealed the room's stunned silence. Pam Bondi, rising from her seat, spoke with measured force. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I did not come here to destroy a person. I came here to protect an institution. The American people must know that their highest court serves them. Not hidden interests, not dark money, not unseen hands." She gathered her folder, looked one last time at Justice Barrett, and walked toward the exit. The cameras followed her every step. The senators remained frozen. The enormity of what had just unfolded was sinking in. And the American public, watching live now on every major network, knew they had witnessed the beginning of a scandal that could change the very face of the Supreme Court. As Bondi's figure disappeared through the hearing room doors. By the time Pam Bondi stepped out of the Judiciary Committee hearing room and into the marble hallway beyond, the news had already gone global. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. Microphones were thrust toward her from every angle. "Ms. Bondi, do you believe Justice Barrett will resign? Is this the beginning of impeachment proceedings? Do you think other justices are compromised?" Bondi raised a single hand. Her voice cut through the chaos. "No comment at this time. The facts speak for themselves. Let the investigation proceed." And with that, she disappeared into the secure elevators, flanked by her team. Inside the hearing room, the atmosphere had not yet recovered from the morning's shocks. The senators sat in closed conference now, behind thick doors, no cameras, no public feed, debating next steps. Meanwhile, in another secured room deep within the Capitol, a team of forensic analysts was already examining the contents of the USB drive Pam Bondi had provided. And what they found in those encrypted emails sent a fresh wave of shock through Washington. The Judicial Partnership Initiative was no vague metaphor. It was a full-fledged, well-funded effort. The emails described detailed targeting strategies for specific federal cases, careful cultivation of relationships with judges, and, most damningly, explicit financial arrangements designed to obscure the flow of influence money. Among the attachments was a chilling spreadsheet, a list of pending Supreme Court cases, color-coded by expected alignment with institute interests, with a special column titled Justice Contacts, listing known intermediaries, including a now infamous family associate linked to Barrett's trust. It was a blueprint for the wholesale corruption of judicial independence. Word of these findings leaked within hours. Though the Judiciary Committee had not yet made a formal public statement, every major media outlet now carried banner headlines. Judicial corruption scandal explodes. Supreme Court rocked by Bondi revelations. Emails show coordinated influence campaign. Barrett under fire. Cable news panels went into overdrive. Legal scholars, ethics experts, former clerks, all were pulled into live interviews. But amid the media frenzy, a quieter storm was gathering inside the Supreme Court itself. That afternoon, an emergency closed-door meeting of the justices was convened. No aides, no clerks, only the 9 justices, seated in their private conference room beneath the iconic frieze of the Marble Temple. And in that room, Justice Amy Coney Barrett now faced not only public scrutiny, but the judgment of her own peers. Chief Justice Roberts was the first to speak, his tone unusually blunt. "Amy," he said, "what we're facing now isn't just political noise. The integrity of this court, the legitimacy of every decision we've handed down, is at stake." Barrett responded, voice low but insistent. "I did not knowingly engage in any corrupt dealings." Justice Sonia Sotomayor spoke next, her words cutting through the room's tension. "Intent is not the only issue here. The appearance of impropriety is enough to damage this institution beyond repair." Justice Clarence Thomas, usually one to avoid intra-court conflict, added in his deep, resonant voice, "If the evidence holds, there will be calls for your impeachment. You must prepare for that reality." For the first time, Barrett's composure cracked. A flicker of despair passed across her face. Gone in a blink, but noticed by all. And then, in a quiet voice, she asked, "What would you have me do?" The room fell silent. It was an extraordinary moment. A sitting justice asking her colleagues for counsel not on law, but on her own survival. Justice Elena Kagan answered first. "You must cooperate fully. No obstructions, no denials. If the evidence clears you, you'll have the public's trust again. If it does not, you must do what is necessary to preserve this court." Barrett nodded slowly. Meanwhile, across town, Senator Eleanor Briggs and Senator James Whitaker were finalizing the terms of the investigative panel. Subpoenas were being prepared. Witnesses were being identified. Pam Bondi had already been asked to return as a key cooperating witness. And the American public, riveted, now debated openly what had once been unthinkable. Could a sitting Supreme Court justice face impeachment for corruption? Late that night, in her Georgetown townhouse, Pam Bondi reviewed the day's events with her team. Her lead investigator, a former federal agent named Marcus Steele, leaned across the table. "You realize," he said, "you just kicked the hornet's nest of all hornet's nests." Bondi nodded. "I didn't do this lightly," she replied. "But if we let this go, if we let even one justice be bought, then the rule of law is dead." Marcus studied her. "And if they come after you?" he asked. Pam Bondi's eyes hardened. "Then they'll find I'm not easy prey." The next morning, Washington woke to a fresh headline. Senate panel to subpoena Barrett's family financial records. Bondi to testify again. Inside the Supreme Court, Justice Barrett prepared to face what would undoubtedly be the most difficult period of her professional life. Her legal team was already drafting statements, negotiating terms of cooperation, but the tide of public opinion was moving fast and not in her favor. And deep within the Judiciary Committee's chambers, Pam Bondi reviewed her next set of evidence. A deeper layer of financial records, phone logs, and encrypted chats yet to be revealed. The real fireworks, she knew, were still to come. And as the cameras prepared once more to capture history in the making, By the time Pam Bondi arrived at the Judiciary Committee for her second day of testimony, the hearing room had transformed into a media spectacle. An ocean of cameras flooded the halls. Satellite trucks lined Constitution Avenue. Protesters gathered in Lafayette Square, some calling for Barrett's resignation, others defending her. The nation was divided, riveted, breathless. Inside the committee room, Bondi sat calmly at the witness table, a new folder of evidence before her. Around her, senators prepared for what was now clearly the most consequential judicial inquiry in decades. Senator Whitaker brought the hearing to order. His tone was grim, measured. This committee is now in receipt of additional evidence provided by Ms. Bondi and her investigative team, he began. Today, we will address communications and financial records subpoenaed from third-party entities. He nodded to Bondi. You may proceed. Pam Bondi rose, her voice firm and resolute. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what we have uncovered goes beyond one case, beyond one justice. It reveals a systemic attempt to subvert the independence of this court. She opened the folder and held up a new document. This, she said, is a call log from a secure messaging app used by executives of the Federal Liberty Institute. Over the past 18 months, this log shows more than 40 encrypted communications between Institute leadership and intermediaries linked to the Barrett Family Trust. A murmur rippled through the room. Bondi continued. These communications coincide with key dates surrounding multiple Supreme Court decisions. Not just Harrington v. SEC, but also Whitman v. EPA and Sanford versus Labor Board, both of which resulted in rulings highly favorable to the Institute's corporate backers. The pattern was now undeniable. Bondi laid out her next piece of evidence, a damning set of financial transfers. Following each of these decisions, she explained, the Institute routed large sums through shell entities in Delaware, ultimately landing in the same trust tied to Justice Barrett's family. A $1.2 million transfer in February, $950,000 in June, another $1.8 million just before the court's fall term. The sums were staggering, the timing incriminating. Senator Briggs leaned forward, her voice sharp. Ms. Bondi, in your professional assessment, do these records constitute prima facie evidence of corruption? Bondi's reply was swift. They do, Senator. They show a clear quid pro quo, financial benefit directly tied to judicial outcomes. At that moment, the hearing room felt like it had stopped breathing, and then the most stunning moment arrived. Bondi withdrew a final document, a signed affidavit from a former Federal Liberty Institute employee, provided under penalty of perjury. This witness, Bondi explained, was present at multiple planning meetings. They confirmed that the Institute targeted specific justices, including Barrett, for what they called long-term alignment. She read aloud from the affidavit. It was understood internally that favorable rulings were expected following sustained financial support. Discussions referenced leveraging Justice Barrett's personal network to ensure sympathetic outcomes. The room was electric. This was no longer inference. This was direct testimony of intent. Justice Barrett, seated silently with her counsel, was visibly shaken. Her legal team huddled urgently. And then, the unexpected. Chief Justice Roberts himself entered the chamber. Unannounced, unprecedented. Senator Whitaker acknowledged him. Chief Justice, you are welcome to speak. Roberts stepped to the podium. His voice was grave. The integrity of the court is paramount, he said. No justice, no institution is above the law. If the evidence presented here is verified, the court will take appropriate action internally. But I also urge this committee to proceed swiftly and thoroughly. It was a seismic moment. The Chief Justice himself signaling the seriousness of the crisis. Senator Briggs followed immediately. In light of this testimony and evidence, she said, I move that this committee recommend a full impeachment inquiry into Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Senator Whitaker seconded the motion. A voice vote was called. The result was unanimous. The room erupted. Reporters dashed for the exits to file their stories. Across America, news alerts blazed. Senate panel moves to impeach Justice Barrett. Bondi testimony triggers historic court crisis. And in that moment, the gravity of what had been accomplished began to settle over Pam Bondi. She had done what few thought possible: pierce the veil of the nation's highest court to expose corruption at its heart. Yet she knew the fight was not over. The impeachment inquiry would be brutal. Political forces would rally. She would be attacked relentlessly. But as she stood to leave the chamber, head held high, she felt no fear, only purpose. Outside, the cameras caught her words. "I did this not for headlines. I did it for justice. No one, not even a Supreme Court justice, is above the law." And as her words echoed across the airwaves, one truth became undeniable. Pam Bondi had changed the course of American history, and the nation, stunned, awakened, would never see its highest court the same way again.